Hello, Jack. It's lovely to see you again. We are honored to bring our supporters to Real Canada and National Canadian Film Day again this year.
Thank you, Marla. I must say that we deal with a lot of organizations and a lot of partners, and there isn't an organization in Canada with whose mission we feel more aligned, more deeply aligned. So it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, and we feel very much the same way. So, speaking of alignment and things like that, tell me what's been going on with Real Canada over the last year.
Oh, so much. We show Canadian films in the schools, K to 12 across the country. That's up to maybe 1,500 screenings a year. It's truly Canadian film has penetrated the education system, which we're so pleased about. We do a training program called Real Opportunities. If any of your supporters are interested in finding out how to get into the film industry and get one of those jobs that turns up at the end of the movie in the list of credits, go to realcanada.ca and look at Real Opportunities. It's a fantastic learning resource for what all those jobs are and how to do that. And a month ago, we had a fantastically exciting event at Rideau Hall with the Governor General, trying to bring Canadian film and its power to the folks up on Parliament Hill. But I really should go back to the fall when your folks at Friends of Canadian Media helped us out so much. We did a letter writing campaign in support of National Canadian Film Day, again, trying to get Ottawa to kind of cast its gaze our way. And you guys blew us out of the water and generated hundreds and hundreds of letters. I think something like 13 or 1,400 letters. In total, we got to close to 3,000 that went to 99% of MPs. And we're really, really grateful to your supporters for that.
Well, I see your thank you, and I raise you many more thank yous because this was also a tremendous year for Friends of Canadian Media. And of course, all of it is made possible by our supporters. And so I'm going to now jump in here and tell you what's been going on with us.
Please.
So, as you know, you just said it yourself, at the beginning of the year, we changed our name from Friends to Friends of Canadian Media. This was a pretty big deal because with this new name, we're really sending a very clear message to everyone, all the work that we're involved in. And while defending the CBC is obviously in our DNA, the values that underpin that CBC support, it extends to protecting and promoting Canadian storytelling. It extends to ensuring that we have a thriving news sector, especially in face of, rampant online harm and disinformation. And 2023 was a really busy year for us on all of those fronts. And, with regard to Canadian storytelling, why we're here today, as I believe the Online Streaming Act officially became law just a few days after we met here last year for National Canadian Film Day. And we spent a lot of last year making that happen.
I was really, really pleased to see that. That was a big win for all of us. And then given that, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what that was all about? Just remind us what those overlying issues were.
Well, I really appreciate you asking me that, Jack, because this is pretty much my favorite topic, both in my personal life and my professional life, which I recognize is a bit sad, and I'll try not to nerd out here too much,
Nonsense.
but it really is one of my favorites.
Nothing sad about it.
Okay, well, in a nutshell, I'll nutshell it. Many, many decades ago, the Canadian government made a commitment to maintaining our cultural sovereignty by supporting Canadian storytelling. And as a result of that, there's a bunch of frameworks and systems that have been sort of built up to ensure that Canadian stories continue to be told. That's the simple, version of the past. And one way that happens is through Canadian broadcast regulatory obligations in the form of financial contributions. So, companies like Rogers, Bell, Chorus, they all contribute to making Canadian content. And then just over about a decade ago, as you know, foreign streaming giants, Netflix was first, entered the Canadian broadcasting ecosystem. So we're talking about companies like Netflix and Amazon and Disney and Paramount. There are so many now, I can't even remember them all off the top of my head. So they came into the Canadian marketplace and they basically had a free ride. They had no similar obligations to either contribute financially to Canadian content or to tell Canadian stories, which is pretty scary given their power and their size and their reach. And so the intent of the Online Streaming Act is to change all of that. It's to level the playing field between these foreign streaming giants and the Canadian broadcasters in terms of their obligations. And hopefully, it will ensure that we have more support in this ecosystem for the creation of Canadian stories. And so, Jack, I think you're the perfect person to articulate why Canadian storytelling matters. I mean, this is the heart of your festival. So, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the movie we're about to see and why these movies mean so much to you and your team.
Yeah, it's that's really great, Marla. Thank you. And I love that your members are going to be seeing Stories We Tell by Sarah Polly. I mean, we have a fantastically accomplished Canadian born and bred and raised and nurtured here in Canada storyteller. And I love this film. She is talking about the stories we tell about ourselves as families and how, as families, we cling to these stories and they give us identity and they give us a sense of belonging. And then on exploration, we find out that perhaps those stories have been covering up deeper stories that perhaps were harsher to know and harsher to hear about, or we were protecting ourselves. But as we learn those stories, we have a deeper sense of identity, a deeper sense of connection with our families. So Stories We Tell, that's what she's dealing with. And I think in terms of National Canadian Film Day, it's the perfect metaphor for the stories we tell as a nation, which is what we're celebrating when we show Canadian films on this day. Similarly, we have stories we tell about ourselves as Canada, and especially these days, we're finding out a lot of things about our history, maybe some of the darker parts of our history that are more difficult to deal with. We're giving less represented voices a chance to come in and tell their versions of events. We're developing a much richer sense of what Canada is, what has made it what it is, what brings us to this moment. And so, by the same token as Sarah has in the movie, I think the telling of these stories, even if it's sometimes difficult, brings us closer together, gives us a greater sense of our own identity together, connects us with our communities, both locally and nationally and regionally, and makes us feel part of this country. Because there are so many things these days that are pulling us apart, and there's this growing, and I consider it an illusion, this growing illusion that we have these hard positions that separate us from one another, and that there's no communicating over those gulfs, and we're more factionalized and we're more polarized. And I continue to believe that there's far, far more that connects us and that we have in common than divides us. And film is a beautiful way to experience one another, experience empathy for each other's situation, and increase that sense of connection with one another in the hopes of a better and more united country.
I couldn't agree more. Actually, I just spent the day at the Democracy Exchange. It's a conference being held in Toronto right now. And funny you should say the word empathy, because that came up a lot about how what's going on online is designed to make us not have empathy for one another. And, one of the things we've always talked about at Friends of Canadian Media is how we need to see our stories reflected back to us. We need to understand each other. It's the only way we can have empathy for each other. And we can have conflicts, of course. But if we don't have empathy for each other, we're not going to listen to the stories we tell. And so I think that's a really important point that you raised.
Exactly. And I'll just add, 90,000 or so Canadians participate at live events on National Canadian Film Day, over 1,300 events across the country. I guarantee you that those 90,000 people do not all hold the same political points of view. And yet they're all together, they're all watching, they're all participating together in this event. And I think that's an important marker for how we have to be, how we have to hold our contradictions inside a sense of connection with one another. But so tell me then, with this online streaming act, how is it actually going to work? How is it going to ensure that we keep getting to tell Canadian stories?
Well, that's a pretty big question. So again, I'll try and kind of keep it, I'll try not to go down that road too far again. But, I said, like, at its core, the point of the legislation is to, bring the foreign streaming giants into, our system. And even though this piece of legislation has passed, the devil is in what I like to call the implementation details. So it's going to take the CRTC, which is our country's, broadcasting regulator, at least a couple of years to sort all this out and figure out how to do this. And I can guarantee you that every step of the way, the streaming giants are going to be pushing for rules and regulations that don't align with our long-standing cultural policy objectives to sort of preserve our distinct voices and identities, to ensure we see ourselves reflected back on screen. They have very different business models and goals. And so, talk about conflict, there's a conflict there. And so I think what's important for stakeholders like Friends of Canadian Media and our supporters to focus on is that the most important detail is that Canadian stories continue to be told by Canadians. So what I mean when I say that is that Canadian producers and production companies, they own and they control their stories, and they're not having decisions about these stories made by Hollywood and tech executives south of the border. That means Canadian writers and directors and performers and other key people in the storytelling process, people like Sarah Polley, are not replaced on shows by non-Canadians. And, to get down to business sort of brass tacks, it also means that, revenues that flow from this content, a meaningful share of them have to stay in Canada so that we have the sort of the foundation to keep making content like the wonderful film that our supporters are about to see, thanks to you.
Well, that's terrific to hear. Obviously, we'll have to stay vigilant around the CRTC process and making sure that our values are expressed clearly to them around the nature of story creation. Who are the people that are key to making sure a story conveys values, as opposed to people who aren't here and who may have a different set of values. And we're going to have to work hard to make sure the definition holds to those standards. And we will be right beside you, Friends of Canadian Media. We will be marching arm in arm towards a happy sunset of a strong definition of Canadian content.
Well, I assure you we will be there. We are always there. And you can check us out at friends.ca, the greatest and easiest URL of all time. And thank you again for letting us join you today. We're very happy for you. Congratulations. And we know it's going to be another successful day.
Great. Everyone, bon cinema, enjoy the film. It's wonderful. Let us know what you think about it. We love if you write to us at realcanada.ca and let us know what your experience was like. And we'll sign off there.
Bye, Jack.